Hey everybody, we are officially live. I'm so excited to dive into another pre-symposium panel. This is the lead up to our executive symposium on June 12th in Dallas, Texas, on the topic getting team buy-in to business transformation. So if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, what is this executive symposium thing? What is a pre-symposium panel? What are all the things? Essentially, a pre-symposium panel is a gathering of three leaders who are going to be at the upcoming executive symposium on June 12th, where we discuss our thoughts on the topic in this case being getting team buy-in to business transformation. We've got three great leaders here with us today. We've got Stephen, we got Brad, and we got Thomas. Stephen, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, Steve Sample. I am the Chief People Officer at Level 4 Group here in Dallas, Texas. We're a wealth management and financial advisor firm.
Very cool. Brad, how about you?
Brad Baumunk, consultant at Adonis Partners, a boutique consultancy focused on continuous improvement.
And Thomas, how about you?
Yeah, Driving Business Growth is my LLC. I'm a business consultant helping businesses grow in the areas of funding, cost reduction, business credit, or anything else that's impeding their growth.
Very nice. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they're there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is through our executive symposium. So let's dive into the topic, getting team buy-in to business transformation. So we see a lot of companies today going through business transformation, and it could be technological transformation like implementing AI or a new software update, or it could be operational. It could be we're changing our processes or we're doing a merger or acquisition. Regardless, no matter how good our strategy is for whatever change or transformation we're trying to go through, at the end of the day, if the people aren't bought into that transformation, we don't have squat. And so what we're here to talk about today is how do we get team buy-in to business transformation? So the first question I'd love to kick off with is, what have you found to be really the first most critical thing that any company should be thinking about when it comes to business transformation? I think oftentimes it's easy to rush right into a business transformation. We get like this wild hair, we go to a conference, we go to the country club, we meet with some other executive, and that other executive says, oh, we just implemented AI doing X. And you're like, I should be doing that. Why can't we should be doing that too. And then you come back to your team, you're like, why haven't we started doing AI stuff? And then they're like, I don't know, because we've never considered it before. And then you rush to push something through, and then not everybody's caught on board with what's happening or what's going on in terms of this transformation. And oftentimes it's fumbled, people trip and fall, it's painful. What is the first thing that executives should be thinking about when it comes to any business transformation? Who wants to go first?
I mean, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think obviously it starts with a very clear vision and strategy, but when it comes to doing something different, um, I'm a big believer in kind of crawling before you walk and partnering with someone in the business who is equally as evangelical about perhaps some small transformation, and then trying to leverage them and their enthusiasm as kind of a beta test for some small change that may work. And then if you get buy-in there and you get execution there on a smaller scale, then you can now market that to the rest of the organization. You can tell the success story. You can tee that up with other parts of the organization. And now I mean, my experience, you've started to build some credibility. People have said, oh, okay, maybe, that guy knows what he's talking about. Maybe I should have a meeting with him and listen to what, they say. So that's kind of what I'm doing here today in my current role on a smaller scale that I hope, in 6, 9 months scales and gets much bigger.
Yes. Yeah, I think, as a project engineer, you treat it as a project. Let's have an implementation plan. Let's have a communication plan. Make sure those line up so nobody's had any surprises. Also, I'm a very big fan of employee surveys. But, the main thing is to get buy-in at your executive team level. Make sure that you have a open communication so nobody's just saying, yeah, that'd be great, and then they don't sell it to their folks. And on down through the organization, that every level has buy-in, not just the executive team.
Yeah, for me, it's certainly has to start at the top with the company culture and vision. So the company has to be focused on transforming. And I'll use an old but good example. Let's think of Blockbuster. Blockbuster thought that the VHS was never going to go away, and they failed to transition to a digital format. And guess what? They're gone. To me, that was a failure of leadership to recognize that if they didn't move in the direction of of digital, that they would be gone within a year to a year and a half. And really, if it's part of the culture and you have people that understand that really, as we've all heard, the only constant is change. We have to be changing to continue because there's companies popping up all the time now that if we're not changing with them, they're going to put us out of business. So we have to have the mindset. We have to be open. And Steve and Thomas, you both make great points. But again, I want to go back to Steve's point of crawl, walk, right? Find a way to test it and find a win, and then go a little bit broader and deeper with this change.
I like it. You guys all bring up very different points. I'll go in reverse order. Brad, you bring up this really great example of Blockbuster. And what's interesting about Blockbuster was it sounds like, based on what you're describing, very status quo oriented, very much like, whoa, 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 people are coming to the video store Friday nights. We've invested in Blu-ray, baby. I mean, come on now, like that's the future. And obviously, they really missed out on the digital boat of being able to, have people watch movies and TV from their couch without actually having to leave their house. And that was a really big misstep.
Mm.
And so what's interesting, I think, about that concept is there's a scenario of just stagnancy, no one changing anything. And I think a lot of times people get comfortable with the lack of change, because the example I kind of gave to begin was, an executive says, we're going to make a change, we're going to move forward, and let's march on forward. And
Mm.
not everyone's fully bought into that change. So somebody's trying to stimulate it. But to Thomas's point, you bring up this concept of, you get some sycophants who are just like, oh yeah, we're on board with this change, boss, for sure, whatever you say. And then they go back to their teams and they're like, I've got no idea what the heck we're doing, but keep doing what you've been doing, and we'll see if this, like what he's talking about, actually will transpire into anything eventually. And then the executive, the new CEO, or whoever, this person who's stimulating this change, is like, why have we not seen any results here? And they're like, oh. And then Stephen, you bring up, I think, a really good example, and I think probably a really practical example of this crawl before you walk concept of getting a beta test, getting someone in that this is just as enthusiastic to try it, because we know that inherently the acceptance of new technology within a corporate setting is like a bell curve. You got some people who are innovators. They're ready to go. Throw me onto any new project. I'm excited about it. You've got those early adopters who are like, okay, if I see some success, I'm in. I'm ready. You got some late adopters who are like, okay, I'm now seeing over half the company do this. I can transition. I can make the change. You got some laggards who are like, I'm still holding on to like the old technology. Like I'm still using an abacus to calculate my spreadsheets. But the point I'm getting to in all of this is that if we're going to try to make any change within any organization, Stephen, I really love this example of the crawl before you walk and finding those excited early adopters. And so I guess maybe to dive into that point and maybe just ask a question, how do you identify those people? Did they freely like advertise themselves to you to say, hey, Steve, if you're looking for anybody to try out any new things, I'm your guy or gal, throw me in, I'm ready. Like, how does that work? Or do you kind of pre-assign them? How do you identify who are your innovators, really the people who want to try new things within your organization?
So in my organization, I've only been here, a month and a half now. And of course, I've met with the rest of the C-suite and had a lot of very good meetings. But I think, my experience, 30 plus years of being in the business world, I think generally speaking, the technology area is a great place to go, because they are usually on the forefront of what's the latest and greatest and the sexiest thing out there, whether it's AI or whether it's just putting a workflow or a process together. And so for me, it was our CIO, because when I met him the first week, some of the first conversations we had were, gee whiz, we still do a lot of stuff. There's still a lot of emails flying around about getting X, Y, or Z done. It's like, gee whiz, I know you've got some fun tools that we could dump all that into and build out a workflow, build out a process, assign tasks, things like that, and make it much more efficient. And of course, his eyes lit up, and he was of the opinion, he was like, I'm so glad to have somebody here that I can have these conversations with. And so we had our first one yesterday. We've had a couple of lunches, just kind of kicking the tires. But yesterday we actually met and we talked about, there are about 3 different things that we're going to, workflow out. We're going to get out of just sending everybody emails and, Garrett, did you do your part? Thomas, did you do your part? We're going to get out of all of that over the next couple of months. And so I'm excited. But for me, I think you'll always be able to tell who's got their heels a little more dug in and resistance versus others. But you just have to have those conversations and kind of take the temperature and see where their head's at.
Brad, Thomas, any thoughts on that in terms of identifying those innovators?
A technique that I saw used for success was, partnering a very innovative leader with the one that would dig their heels in to try to get that conversion to agreement that this is a good thing at a lower level than just, directing, hey, we're doing this. Try to get an innovator to coach that person of why it's good at a lower level. And then once that buy-in gets in, the person that tends to dig their heels in, once they're on board, makes it a whole bunch, a lot easier for the rest of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's great, Thomas. I was going to say something very similar, and it's listen to the why. Why are you resistant to change? Tell me more. Help me understand, right? And truly listen to understand, because they might have really good points as to why, and don't just use one data point, right? So again, for me, I like email, but now that I use Teams, and Teams over a couple of years has become a much more reliable way to get things done, bring groups in, get things solved much more quickly. And also, I want to go back to Steve, building out systems that have, whether you're using Jira or you name it. I mean, there's just a ton of different systems out there where you've got work owners, and you can sit down in a meeting and say, wow, Brad, you were supposed to have this done by Monday the 19th, and it's past due. What are we going to do? Because there's dependencies here, and Garrett's got a piece, and Thomas has a piece. There's more accountability built in with the solutions that are out there to move quickly. Because in today's world, if we're not moving quickly, we're going to get run over. Somebody else is going to move past us extremely fast. And all of a sudden, we're going to look back and say, wow, our competitors are stealing our market share. They're stealing our customers. Their customer journey got better. Their experience got better. All these different things. So, to me, there's a lot of great points here, and finding out who the resistors are, understanding the whys, truly listening to why they are resisting, and then figuring out, how do we overcome these objections? How do we overcome them? And sadly, sometimes those people might not be the best people for your organization, because they're there because it's the way we've always done it. We're going to continue to do it that way. And that's usually one of the worst reasons. They're not willing to think for themselves and think outside the box.
It's interesting, Brad, you bring up a really good point of people resisting, playing devil's advocate, because I like to play devil's advocate. Some people are resistant to change because it's the way it's always been done, but sometimes people are resistant to change because they created that process in the first place.
Yep.
Like, oftentimes there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of emotional charged feelings around, like, maybe I was here in the early days, we were building this company, we had no process or systems in place. I put these processes and systems in place, and then we grew to this really, really big company, and maybe a little bit of my ego says I was a big reason for why we grew to this size. I mean, we couldn't have been able to handle all this business if we didn't have processes or systems in place. And so if it's not broke, why fix it? And so sometimes there are egos at play here. How do you one understand, how do you get someone to admit that their ego might be a little bit bruised when you come in and propose some form of change? And two, how do you go about overcoming it and getting them to buy into the greater vision of whatever change initiative that is?
I think the first step is acknowledging them, acknowledging the role they played in getting the company to where they are, and truly appreciating them. And then you've got to work to win them over, to help them understand that, yeah, you know what, you're right. You've gotten us here, but now we have to look at what's going to get us to the next. You've gotten us to $1 billion. What's going to get us to two, four, five? And again, it's unfortunate to have to say, but sometimes change is necessary, not just in process, but in people.
Yeah.
Nobody likes their baby to be called ugly, right? And so to the extent that you can avoid that, and I agree with Brad, acknowledging what came before and the great work they've done is awesome. But I think it's important when you're talking to them about change, I think about kind of that right to left thinking, because I've spent a fair amount of time the last couple of years thinking about change and doing things differently. And if the only answer I can come up with when I'm thinking about implementing a change or talking to somebody about it is that, well, it'll be faster. I'm like, so what? I mean, is faster always better? I mean, is a Corvette better than a F-150 just because it's faster? I mean, they both have functions. They both do different things, but you have to get beyond just the speed, unless you're like that's your business, telecom or something like that, or F1, and get to the result, right? So it's not just about being faster. It's about being faster because it delivers X, Y, and Z. And that's where you have the conversation of that's why we need to change. It's not just doing 5 things. It's what's at the finish line and what is the result. It's not just about these activities. It's about the result that you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
That's what you have to sell them on.
Yeah, I think this is one of the more important why conversations that Brad mentioned, of this person that kind of has the ownership of the current, and how do you get them to help you go to the next level, or or are they able to, so they could be on the team, but maybe, there's other ideas that they're helping with. And so that conversation is crucial, because if that person gets buy-in, then people in the organization see that the author of our current system is on board with moving to the new system.
Yep.
Or whatever the change is. That may not be a system, but whatever the change is.
Is it always obvious who the author of the system is?
They will tell you, yes.
That's like,
You'll hear, well, back in 2007,
Yeah.
and that you'll have a lot of those conversations.
Yes.
Yeah, when I worked for a large insurance company, P&L, this is back in 2007, but the joke always back then was the systems were built by people 40 years ago and they are no longer alive. Yet we couldn't change because nobody knew how to change those systems. And replacing those systems was a multi-billion-dollar effort. And it was just okay, we're gonna have to deal with what we deal with. I mean, again, it's just another reason, right? And do I believe all that in hindsight? No. I just think that the people that built those systems weren't interested in making any changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I found myself in a similar situation at a large health insurance company. We were running a lot of AS400 on a
Yes.
mid-range system, and they wanted to migrate to a different environment. And we realized all these AS400 guys are 55 or 60, and a lot of them are retired. We had to go find like 15 or 20 of them around the country, bring them out of retirement, pay them ridiculous amounts of money as consultants for like a year-long period just to get things upgraded and ready to move.
Yeah.
And I remember having those conversations like, yeah, we've only got 3 of those guys left. All the rest have retired. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
then part of you makes you wonder, like, how much did they invest in the propaganda campaign to convince everybody it would cost you billions of dollars to make that change? Was it billions of dollars? Maybe, I don't know. Like, maybe was it, millions of dollars? But we really kind of pushed up that thought. So why change?
Yeah.
It's gonna stay the same. But Stephen, you're in this really interesting circumstance. You are the new guy on the block at your company, and I would imagine as you start implementing some changes, some people are going to get their feathers ruffled because they might have been the author of some of those changes. And so you maybe take one of those team members that you think is like an innovator, and you're like, hey, I got an idea for how we could do this or that or something else. What would you think about giving this a try? And then they go out and they try it. And the person who authored the previous solution finds out, and they're like, whoa, 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 what are you doing, Jenny? Like, go back to the old way, Jenny. Go back to the way you've been doing it. I don't know. This new guy, Steve, I don't know about him. He told you to do it this way. Like, whatever, appease him, do whatever you need to do. But like, make sure you're not missing out the processes. But you don't find out that Jenny's been getting this friction this whole time. And so you're thinking to yourself, great, well, this new system that I've asked her to do isn't working because she's not really fully using it. She's still reverting back to the old system, not realizing she's facing a lot of pressure from this original author to do that. So how do you go about sussing out the internal political dynamics that could be going on that you are not receiving? Like, is there a way to kind of sniff out, like, like where there's smoke, there's fires, or a way that you can sniff out whether or not there's some political tension going on that is not being explicitly told to you, but you can maybe sniff it out quicker than finding out 8 months later or something like that?
I think it starts with, if I'm working with Jenny, first of all, I'm going to stay very close to her. And I'm going to make sure that whatever we're trying to change is very much in alignment with kind of this larger vision that the CEO and the senior leadership is talking about, and that we're implementing on that, and then it's aligned to that. And then I would simply go back to the proof's in the pudding. So if Jenny's program or whatever she's doing differently is slightly successful, I'm going to advertise the hell out of that. And I'm going to make sure, and not me tooting my own horn and not me calling somebody's older baby ugly. It's just saying, hey, wow, what you guys what used to take 4 days now takes 20 minutes. And not that 4 days was bad. Maybe that was very good, back in 07, but it's 2025. And now it takes, 20 minutes and we have X, Y, and Z results that we want. And so I would continue to advertise the success. I would, as these guys have suggested, Thomas and Brad, I would also make sure that the original authors were bought in. I do believe the point of, I believe Thomas said, hey, if you can get those older authors who did it back in 07 to advocate for it, like, hey, what I did was great in 2007, but this is 2025. That is a huge hurdle if you can get over that. And if their heels aren't too dug in, then you'll have success. And in my career, I haven't found, people have varying, being stubborn is a sliding scale, right? So, but in my experience, most people they're pretty agreeable when things are fairly obvious. And, if they're just being difficult for the sake of being difficult, that's not a good position for anyone to be in.
Yeah, I think one other approach that has worked extremely well for me in consulting is make sure you include interviews with the front line. People that this change are going to impact the most. They're the ones that are going to have to learn the new process, and go in and ask and watch what they're doing. Ask them, how would you improve? And then ask, what resistance do you think we may run into with trying to change this? Don't only do that of the front line, the supervisors, the managers. Make sure you get a good lay of the land, good input from all the different levels within the organization, and then combine all that information and use, and I don't like use, but utilize that information to affect change management.
Yeah, I think it's important to have, the ability to communicate upward, without fear of retribution. Like if they are struggling or they're getting friction, that they can come to you. But beyond that personal side of it is implementation, if possible, of adoption metrics and performance metrics. So you can see both, is it being accepted or implemented? And then if it is, then what's the success story that, like Steve was saying, that you could tell and have it even better adopted?
That's smart.
If you can come up with metrics like that, it really is the proof of the pudding, like you said.
Good point.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up, Thomas, because that's exactly kind of where I was going next. So what happens when we get our innovators who try it? They're like, this is good. This is good. This is making my life better. You know what? I'm about it. how do we transition? How do we cross that chasm to the early adopters? How do we get them on board for the change? Because just because we have some innovators on board with it isn't necessarily guaranteed that our early adopters are going to be adopting this as well, or getting the rest of the company to sign up. Is that going to be seamless, amazing, easy transition? Is there any tips or strategies to getting that next step of people onboarded to this new system or way of doing things?
Well, in my mind, you have to have a pilot group that's going to give you the feedback, and you have to build in pauses because you have to fail fast. If the pilot group says, "Oh, this is terrible," be willing to say, "We're going to put a pause on." Have those pauses built in so that you've got a week, 2 weeks to retool based on that feedback, and then go back to the pilot group taking their feedback, because if you're listening to them and integrating their feedback into the process because it's smart feedback, then you roll those changes out. This is great. You're listening to us. My life is so much easier. They are going to be your advocates. They're gonna be out there going, "Oh man, this pilot is so great. Work is so much easier and my day goes by so much smoother. I don't have to ask for all these approvals. I can just get things done." That's the whole strategy of how you're rolling this new system out. Not overcommitting to dates, meaning, "Oh, we're gonna have this new system out next month," when nobody thought about the bumps in the road you were gonna hit, and now it's gonna take 6 months. Everybody's like, "This is a failure." Tell them it's gonna be 6 months, and if you get it done in 3 or 2, great. But build in the right pauses, the ability to retool things when you learn that it's not going the way we thought it would. I think that's the strategy to success with these changes, or a strategy, not the.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the organizational memory of previous attempts. Have these generally been successful either on a large scale or a small scale, or have there been horrendous, shipwrecks or train wrecks? So if you know where your organization is, that allows you to either put more emphasis on how slow you go, or you can move quicker. But just having that memory really helps.
Yeah, I think when I find myself in these situations, I always walk around and various people in this, what's the appetite for change around here? Is it huge? Or is it because everybody's frustrated as hell? Or is it very small because everybody thinks that this is just the smoothest running machine ever? And you'll get varying answers. And I can tell you, in my organization currently, I think the appetite's pretty big because everybody's bought in on the vision and the change. I still believe you got to crawl before you walk. And I mean, I'll give you an example of one thing we're looking at. We have a situation where we have a group of certain employees. We're not sure if they're compensated and paid in the right way. And so I have my ideas, their leader has his ideas, but we're surveying that whole group to say, does it make sense? And what are your thoughts? And we may change something radically, we may change nothing, but this whole idea of kind of seek first to understand. And obviously before I went down this road, I tested it with the senior most leadership to see if there's any appetite at all to even look at this issue. And they were like, yeah, that probably makes sense. And so we are. But like I said, we may do something, we may not do anything at all.
Well, you're kind of walking down this next thought that I'm having right now, and this concept of incentives. And that's something that I think a lot of people, a lot of times when it comes to change initiatives, we don't fully think about. And so to kind of share a story or an example of this, one example that comes to mind is consultant comes into this manufacturing plant. Manufacturing currently has around 8% breakage of their product. On the line, they break 8% of their products. Every single month, there's always 8% breakage. Well, this consultant comes in, they meet with the plant manager, they say, hey, we can take your breakage from 8% to 1% with this new system or whatever they got, new technology, whatever it may be. Saving you hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month, millions of dollars every year. The plant manager looks at it and says, I can't swing it. It just doesn't make sense. Even though the cost, by the way, to implement this solution is maybe 50 grand, and you're going to make that money back in 1 month, let alone a year. The plant manager says, I can't swing it. I just, I can't make it work. And the consultant's like, what the heck? What do you mean you can't make it? What do you mean you can't swing it? Like, it's a clear mathematical equation. You give me 50, I give you 150 this month, next month, the month after that, and every subsequent month for the rest of time. What do you mean you can't swing it? And what that consultant neglected to realize was the incentives. See, that plant manager is given 8% breakage. He is allowed to have 8% breakage every single month, every single year. That's his breakage allowance. So when it comes to his incentive bonus at the end of the year, as long as at 8% or below, he's totally fine. Meaning that, he also runs a P&L. Adding a $50,000 expense to his L on his P&L, that would hit him in his incentive bonus way more than the savings of 150,000 in minus breakage. He doesn't see a dime of whether or not he's at 8% breakage rate or 1% breakage rate. For him, it's like, it's like, I get why, like, you'd want me to implement it, but it doesn't happen. And I think that's a very macro kind of example. On a micro level, there's examples too. It's like, I could take the time to learn this new system, but I've been just used to this old one and it doesn't take me that much time and I get my work done and like, yeah, the company saves, 20% or whatever from me doing this new way, but I don't see a dime of it. What incentive do I have to implement this new way? So I guess the question I have is, how do we understand incentives that other people might have that might not be obvious to us, even though the business case is obvious? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think the lower level managers have a feel for what incents their people, and they could talk about it in those terms at the lower level, but they could also come up with ideas of how to incentivize, adopting the change, whether that be bonus or some kind of other, way to make it aligned with what the employees are doing. And if it's middle management, that's probably even more important to make sure that the implementation is aligned with those folks, because they are kind of on the ground of getting the line people to adopt. And so you got to look at it at every level of what are the incentives and how to be in alignment with them, or adopt new incentives, either monetarily or recognition or something.
Yeah, I learned something years ago. I heard I got invited to one of my first leadership meetings, and our COO at the time, large insurance company, he said something that really resonated with me, and I've taken with me ever since. He says, what gets measured gets done, what gets paid gets done fast. And I've always kind of carried that with, I don't know if you got that from Jack Welch where he got it, but this was back in the late 90s when I heard this. And I am a huge believer in it. You have to, I think of it as levers, right? What levers can I pull or create in order to get Garrett to do X, Y, and Z, right? Whatever that is. You either have to create the levers or you have to realign incentives to different levers. And so those are kind of the conversations we're having over here now. In your example with the factory, the guy, the leader of the factory, if I'm that consultant, I'm probably going pitching that idea to that plant manager's boss, who's ever over like 4 or 5 plants, right? Because he or she is probably incentivized, maybe, but if they have the same incentive, then yeah, you may continue running brick walls, but you may end up having to go to the CEO of the entire organization and pitch it to him or her and say, I can, reduce your 8% down to 0 or 4, and your EBITDA is better, your P&L is better, everything's better, right? So I think part of it is figuring out who's the right person to talk to and who is going to be most aligned, either incentivized or another way into the message I'm delivering.
Nice.
And I think this goes back, Garrett, to the main question. When looking at these, you can't go into these things with blinders. You also have to say who is getting incentivized for today's environment? What are they getting incentivized on? How will this impact incentives? And should the incentive plans with this change be changed to get things done, but pay people to get things done fast? I butchered your quote there, Steve, but again, it's all got to align, right? And that's that's a reason a lot of times in my experience, you got to pull different people in. HR needs to be involved because HR comes to the table and says, wait a minute, we've got these incentive plans in the factory. And, Joe's getting incentivized to have 8% or less breakage. If we're going to change the amount of breakage that we have, should we look at his incentive plan to realign it to whatever the new model is? Pulling in those different parts of the organization that are critical to what they understand, because as an ops guy, I might not be thinking like Steve, the HR guy, and all the incentive plans that may be affected.
And sometimes that can be slippery slope. Like, if you have I've seen this in my life, you put a safety goal into a warehouse. Well, okay, if you have, X amount of accidents per quarter, right? Everybody gets a $500 bonus. Well, now maybe you've incentivized people not to report unsafe things,
Yes.
right? So it's kind of, sometimes you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You got to kind of weigh those things. But for my 2 cents is you kind of got to find the common ground and the happy medium that everybody can live with.
Yeah. So I shouldn't report that I cut my finger off today because
see, you just might have impacted your bonus, right? So,
right.
Brad, shut up! Don't say anything about that. Right?
Just put a Band-Aid on it.
That's right.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to see the unintended consequences of messing with your system of compensation and what you're trying to get people to do. Best intentions often go south like that, and it's almost comical. It's like, oh yeah, of course they're doing that now,
Right.
And so yeah, you got to be careful.
We've been accident free for 2 years.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and that's a great kind of dichotomy there is, creating, evaluating, and reevaluating incentives, I think could probably be like the hidden key to all of this, but it has to be quick and it has to be efficient because but it's tough if you do that because if your comp plan gets incentivized too often, you're going to get stressed out and be like, I don't know what I'm getting paid for this month, if I'm being honest.
Right.
And that creates confusion, it creates frustration. But yeah, to your guys' points, like all of a sudden we got incentivized to not report safety, issues. Now we all get our bonuses, but you got Johnny still walking with a limp, and Jennifer just got her index finger cut off.
Right, it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, that's really interesting. But I'm glad that we're discussing it. I think these are really interesting points, and I'm glad that we're bringing this together because even though we might not have necessarily like the golden clear cut, here's the solution to our problem here, by at least acknowledging here's a path forward or things that we should be thinking about it as it pertains to getting team buy-in to business transformation. Ideally, us as leaders can become better in terms of identifying what can work for our team and what is the best next step forward. Well, Stephen, Brad, Thomas, thank you guys for being here on the Pre-Symposium panel. If you are watching this and you're thinking to yourself, I want to meet these 3 great guys, come to our Executive Symposium June 12th in Dallas, Texas. Topic is getting team buy-in to business transformation. I'll post the RSVP link in the comments on this video. But everybody, thank you for your time. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, y'all.